having a network is important. Having people that you can talk to, having people that you can share your challenges with, who aren't going to judge you, who aren't beholden to you in some way, so that you do get some honest feedback. And it's surprising how differently someone else might look at the same set of circumstances that you do, and give you some completely different insight that you might not have thought of. So creating, if you're starting the journey and you don't have a network of peers, create that network of peers, because you're going to need the moral support if nothing else, and you're going to need somebody to talk to.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours? Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Michael Yinger. And Michael, just give a quick introduction. So in high school, started in an alternative high school, then went to a normal high school in Oakland, and then moved back and forth between those for a bit, and then went off to college and was a history major. And during the summer, also got to work with his dad on a ship, which sounds pretty good. So got into maritime industry for a period of time, finished college and went to the maritime industry and anticipated going to law school. Didn't end up going to law school, but rather started working full time in the maritime industry. Worked for a couple of fleets, and then, as it sometimes happens, got laid off. Took a job in the shipping company in Oakland. Moved around or had to move around quite a bit over the years, and then realized that all he was doing is consulting, and so decided to start up his own start being a consultant, working for a consulting firm. Built a website-based company, and then I did that until the bubble burst. Started his own company and doing tech interfaces, and then fast forward a bit till today, has moved on to another consulting company where he's managing and doing that, as well as running his own podcast. So great journey, and excited to have you on the podcast, Michael.
Wow, that's impressive. Is that one person's life, Devin?
As far as I know, unless you've lived multiple lives, so
yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Well, we're excited to have you on. So I kind of give a condensed version of a much longer journey, but let's unpack that a bit. So tell us kind of how your journey got started in high school, kind of going between quote unquote normal and alternative schools.
Yeah, well, for geography's sake, we were living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was targeted for a school that my mother, who was in education, didn't think much of. And so she got me into what you would call an alternative school. We were in an old converted battery factory down in the flatlands of Berkeley, and a lot of kids who just weren't into conventional education and whatnot. And I think I was there for a year. Probably the most interesting part of that particular journey was that in my second semester, they asked me to teach a class. So here I was, a 10th grader, teaching East African prehistory, which it's safe to say I was about a chapter ahead of my students in that class. But, it was good for a discount on my tuition. So, it wasn't such a bad gig early in life. I went back to a traditional school at Berkeley High. That was as a result of my mother, again, finding a way to maneuver around the school system. And probably the one subject that really touched me was history. I had a great history teacher for a couple of semesters there, and that had me choose to major in history when I went to college. I went to UC Santa Cruz, which, in some ways you could consider, particularly in those days, an alternative school. It was 9 colleges all in the same beautiful campus up above Santa Cruz. And the school that I was enrolled in was primarily liberal arts, where history was a sort of a natural subject. I studied American and medieval history, of all things. Between the first and second year, my father got me a job on a ship. And I spent 2 months traveling all the way around South America and up and down the West Coast, It was a cruise freighter. So we had cargo, but we also had passengers. I
Mm.
thought, this is a great life. I could really see living like this. So I spent the next year trying to get a job. Yeah, still going to school, working on my
Mm.
history degree, and ran afoul of the unions. Not a foul, but yeah, it's sort of a stopping block, right? It's as like some industries, if you're not somehow connected, you're not going to get through the union. And so I said, well, I'm going to finish this history degree, and then I'm going to go to the Maritime Academy, and then I'll get a job that way. And so sure enough, that's what I did. I finished up at my history degree and went to the Maritime Academy in Vallejo and got a second bachelor's degree in nautical industrial technology. And that led me to starting working life in the shipping industry. Now, my intention was I really liked the nautical life, and I thought it'd be great to be a nautical attorney, to study admiralty law. And so that was my intention. I went to work and was working for a company, shipping company in San Francisco, and started investigating going to law school, took the test and whatnot, and then I got some coaching from one of my former teachers who was an attorney. He basically said, "Look, if you want to make the most of your law school experience, you need to go during the day. You can go night school; it takes you longer. You don't get as much out of it." And now, I had nothing to weigh that on other than what this guy was telling me. So I said, you know what?
Mm.
I'll go to business school instead. Shows you I was a little a little bit amenable. What I realized, here I am, a 24-year-old kid. I'd got two college degrees under my belt. Maybe a little cocky. No one paid any attention to me. No one was listening to me. And so I
Mm.
went the route of saying, well, if I have another degree, maybe somebody will pay some attention to me. Ironically, halfway through my master's program, I got laid off for the first time. That company laid me off because we had a fleet reduction. And so I started going to sea for Chevron, actually working on tankers, and I was going to school half the year. So I'd work 6 months and I'd go to school for 6 months. And I got laid off from there too. It's the nature of that particular industry. Chevron went through a fleet reduction, and I was offered a severance. And the Maritime Academy said, well, we'd love to have you come teach here full time. So I went and I did that for a few years. And then I decided, well, I'd rather be working in the industry than teaching about the industry. So I got a job with a large multinational shipping company that actually does exist, but it no longer exists alone. It was purchased by somebody else.
Mm.
And I spent almost 11 years working for them, traveling all over the world. I lived in Singapore a couple of times. I lived in China for about 6 weeks, did a lot of traveling for them. And, as you said in my intro, what I realized towards the end is that they were using me on special projects. I had a day job that I could do from just about anywhere, managing logistics. And they would send me off to, well, go fix this or go research that. Or, I just had one of those kind of personalities, I guess, that lent itself to that kind of a lifestyle. And so I started looking for actual consulting jobs and found one with a technology company that, again, doesn't exist anymore. We were what you would consider to be a second tier consulting company, which is to say we were about 500 million, 4,000 or 5,000 people, but nothing compared in those days to the big consulting firms in New York City. And so they moved me to New York, and I spent about 2 years with them doing consulting primarily around the web, that sort of business and web tool interface in the very early days of the web.
Now, let me just ask in a one question
Yeah.
to follow that up, because so you were in the maritime industry, and you said kind of had that realization. Well, they're really doing, consulting, but what made you decide to switch? In other words, you could have just continued to do the consulting
Yeah.
via the what company you're at versus going to do full time, consulting
Yeah.
at a consulting firm. So, kind of, what was the trade off or the motivation to say, hey, yeah, I could stay here, but I'd rather, if I'm already going to be a consultant, I'll go work in a consulting firm.
As sometimes happens, Devin, the motivation was getting kicked in the ass by my company. Pardon me for being blunt. I had applied for a job internally and had been given that job. And my vice president called me in and said, we're not going to let you take it because you're too valuable where you are. And I said, well, okay, that's not what I want to do. And so I actually at that point started looking for something else. I literally was moving from being managing a logistics practice and then doing this consulting into the consulting group within my company. And they said, no, we're not going to let you go. You're too, it's the old, you're too valuable where you are. There's a lesson in that for companies, right? That if you choose to block the path of somebody that you've actually opened in the first place, there could be consequences. And sure enough, several months later, I found the right job, which is was working for this company in actually headquartered in Boston, but I was working for them in New York. I was there for, as I say, a couple of years, and then I was recruited out along with my partner in crime, who was a lead sales guy. I was a delivery guy. He would sell it. I would figure out how to make it work. It was one of those kinds of things. And we got hired as a team to another small consulting firm in headquartered in Minneapolis, and we did that for about 2.5 years, and that's when the bubble burst and sort of the whole everything started to fall apart. The company went through a number of rounds of layoffs. I got to lay myself off, which is in itself an interesting experience.
Wait. So you can't just blow quite by that one. So how did you lay yourself? In other words, I get how you could get laid off. I get how you can lay others off. But how do you have the conversation with yourself that you're firing yourself? Seems like you could just say, I'm not going to let myself go.
So we were in a difficult situation, chasing a market that was disappearing, and our CEO at the time chose to handle it by just continuing to reduce the size of the organization. I was in charge of the recruiting organization, and so every couple of months I would have to cut some more. And we finally got to the point where we couldn't deliver enough service with the people we had left. So I'm talking to the CEO. I said, okay, I've finalized the final list for this time around. He said, I'm at my doctor's office, and I'm about to go in to see my doctor. Put yourself on the list and call me later. That was it. That's how it happened. Needless to say, I never spoke to him again. 2 weeks later, I was invited to a company phone call by one of my former colleagues. He said, you might want to listen in. So he dialed me into this phone call to hear that the chairman of the board had laid off the CEO. Well, a little bit too late for me, but it was a again, learning experience. All my terminations have come as learning experiences. In this case, I said, okay, well, I've been doing consulting, and they're things that I know I've got from a skill set perspective. So I started my own company. That was when I started the consulting company that I still have today. I spent several years doing all kinds of projects.
One quick question. So you say kind of started the consulting company you're still doing today. Was that kind of out of necessity? We're saying, well, laid off, this is, can't find another job. Nobody wants me, whether it's overqualified or whatever the terminology is. And so you decided to start your own business out of necessity, or is it more of, hey, this is a great opportunity. Always wanted to kind of pursue my own thing. This kind of gives me the kick in the pants, so to speak, to get that going. Or kind of, how did you decide to go from working for someone else for a good portion of your career to really saying, I'm going to do my own thing?
Well, so it actually was a combination of both. One, not working was not an alternative.
Sure.
There was not a lot that looked like what I would do from a corporate job in that time period. And yet there were a lot of opportunities for work that needed to be done. In some ways, the early 2000s were really the heyday of technology and process consulting. The firms were making a lot of money. The small deals, which were the kind of things that I worked on, would often go unnoticed, and so were easier to pick up. And so it just seemed like a natural sort of progression to take my skills and put them in the market in a different way, rather than working for a single company. So I did that for about 6 years. And now we're coming up on the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. My largest customer, and at that point, I was working for them probably 90% of the time, 90% of the time. They just had one project after another, which was great. I loved it. It was a very, very good time for them and for me, except that they said, well, we can't afford you. You're great. You're a consultant, but if you want to stay working for us, you're going to have to come work for us. And so I did. I took a full-time position with them. interesting experience. And as part of this one, I was starting on a Monday. My boss called me on Thursday and said, "Look, tomorrow I need to lay off your entire department. Would you like to do that, or do you want me to do it?" And I said, "Well, okay, I guess I'll do it." I hadn't even started with the company yet, so I got to lay off my entire department, something obviously I'd had some familiarity with. It was 2009. It was tough times, and this was a staffing company, and business was slow in 2009 as the country was recovering from the financial crisis. I got in, things improved, and we built ourselves back up. I'd put in about 5 years, and I had expressed a desire to try something different. And I had some conversations about moving actually to Europe with the company. They were amenable to that. And then another company came knocking, which sometimes happens. And they offered me a job that I felt was a greater growth opportunity. Same industry. And so I left that company and went to a new company. So I had been, I'd been with them. If you count the time I'd consulted for them, I'd been working with them for almost 10 years. Went over to this new company and was managing outsourced recruiting. And I was responsible for client delivery for 17 accounts around the world. Had a fairly large team working for me. Things are going great. My boss calls me one afternoon and says, "I'm sending you an NDA. Sign it, and then call me back." So I did. She said, "I'm bringing you under the tent." It's a term I'd never heard before, although I'm very familiar with it now. "I'm bringing you under the tent. We're selling the division, and you're on the deal team." I said, "Okay. What does that mean?" She said, "Well, what it means is that you and everybody below you, all 650 of you, are going, but I'm not. So I can't be part of the deal team." Okay. This was August. I said, "By when?" And she said, "By December 31st. I said, "Of what year?" And she said, "Oh, this year. So we proceeded to go through a very rapid M&A process. We met with a dozen different firms, presented our case, and then went through second and third rounds and came down to one company picking us. And the deal was finalized on January 4th. So it wasn't exactly December 31st, but I guess that was close enough for the books that somebody was okay with it. So January 4th of that year, I started with a new company in roughly the same role, and spent some time doing that. And then my boss came to me and said, "Look, I'd really like you to run global sales." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, that's interesting. I've never run global sales before." She said, "You've been on all the sales calls. You're part of the team that helps close the deals. I know you can do this." Okay. So I ran global sales for a while. I was also in charge of organizational strategy. And my largest client said to my boss, "It's great that you're promoting Mike, but you can't have him." So I got to keep my largest account and continue to service them, which was okay. And then she just kept adding things on. She said, "Well, okay, now I want you to do product management. Still do the other stuff, but I want you to do product management. And then I want you to do implementation, and I want you to do sourcing, and we'll just see how it goes." So I was sort of getting settled into that, and then COVID came, and with COVID, we had about a 60% reduction in revenue in a 3-week period. Again, that's public knowledge. I'm not telling anybody any secrets. It was a tough
it's
time.
probably not the only. You're probably not the only business that had that.
No. Some companies in our industry fared better. It just depended on which industries you supported, and we had some hospitality and some transportation companies, and we got hit pretty hard. So I was, along with a lot of other people, let go. I had been talking to a startup about being on their board, and they came to me and said, "Oh, it looks like something's changed in your circumstances." I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Well, come talk to us." So I went to a meeting with them, and they said, "We'd like you to come in and help us set up the company. We want you to be our founding CEO." Okay, well, that's something that I think I'm capable of doing. And I spent about 18 months hiring the critical people, finding a tech firm, finding attorneys, getting finance set up, all the kind of things that you have to do when you're a startup, and sometimes all at once. About a year ago, I said to the board, "Look, this is we're up and running. The technology's out there. We're chasing customers. I want to do something a little different with my career. I want to get back into consulting and grow that business." And so I did. I started working back more full time on consulting. I'm still part of the company, part time, and as a board member. And late last fall, I had been doing podcasts, and I said, I think I could do a podcast. I think I have something to say, because that's the important part. I mean, anybody can do a podcast. Do you think you have something to say more than once? Do you have a theme that you think you can repeat over time? And so I started my podcast and have been working on that now for about 9 months, and have several episodes already published and several more waiting to go through the production process. And so that's what's gotten me to where I am today, working, multiple things, but things that I enjoy doing. And podcasting is it's fun to have the conversations, and it's fun to share that kind of knowledge with the marketplace. And then with my consulting, there's a tie-in, because my podcast, of course, talks about the same kind of things that I would do from a consulting perspective. And then I still work on the startup and help them move through things and whatnot. So it's a fulfilling bit of work that I've got going on right now. There you go. That brings us up to today.
No, and that's definitely a fun journey. And so, kind of now, as you brought us up into today, if you're to kind of now look into the future, or say, kind of, where is the next 6 to 12 months headed for you, or what are you going to be? What's the next direction you're going to be going or continuing down? Kind of, what does that look like for you?
I would say I'm not very good at crystal ball. I'll just be very honest. I would say that the aspiration that I have is that over the next 6 to 12 months, my consulting practice continues to grow, and I get to the point where I'm starting to build a team to assist. Right now, I'm a solopreneur, although I can, I tap people if I need to for certain activities, and I can see that it will be. I'll get to the point that, or my intention is to get to the point where I need additional assistance to grow the consulting firm. This is my aspiration. This is what I'm working on pretty much full time right now.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like it's a fun road ahead, and it will definitely provide a great journey for you. So, well, now as we've kind of reached the present day of your journey, and even looking at a bit into the future, so to speak, a great time to transition to the two questions I always ask at the end of each episode. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What did you learn from it?
Yeah. In the early days of having my own company, I got connected with a guy I'd worked with years before, and we got connected with a entrepreneur who had some very interesting intellectual property, again in the HR tech space, coincidentally. And so we got together and we decided we were going to make a company of it. And the mistake that I made, and it is something that occasionally, I won't say it wakes me up at night, because it's been now many years since then, but certainly when I reach back and think about it, I shudder a little bit. We didn't have money, right? And that's so true of most entrepreneurs. And we got connected through a friend with a technology firm that did tech development for equity, or in this case, tech development for future support dollars. And so, of course, like a lot of entrepreneurs, we had this, grand plan of how we were going to grow, and we agreed to this contract that said, in 2 years we'll start paying X amount of dollars in support fees. And we thought, well, that's not going to be a problem, because we're going to be making all this money by the time we get there. Well, we got there, and we weren't making any money, and our bills started to mount up. And then at the end of the day, we had to come to a settlement with the guy, and he got to keep the technology. He didn't get the IP, but he got to keep the technology that the IP was built on, and so that kind of put us out of business. And so the lesson I learned from that is, you really got to think about what are the long-term implications, particularly of these sort of trade-off deals. It's one thing if you've got cash flow and you're writing, you're agreeing to a contract to pay somebody for services that are based on the cash flow, but writing a contract based on future cash flow is very risky. Very risky, and I did not appreciate that at the time. I certainly do now, and when asked, will share that with people that we were left in a lurch, and by the way, he was left in a lurch because he spent a lot of money developing our technology. So it wasn't like this he cheated us or anything. He upheld his end of the bargain, and we couldn't uphold ours. That's a tough situation to be in, and as I say, it no longer wakes me up at night. But boy, when I think about it, I do shudder a bit.
No, and I think that it's one of those where in a slightly different note, but is even as a law firm, we get a lot of people that will come in and say, well, do you want to work for, we can't pay it, but we'll work, do you want to work for, equity, or do you want to work for X, Y, and Z, and those things. And sometimes it's tempting, or it makes sense, or you're saying, oh, this is a great deal. And on the other hand, it almost always want to put you in a situation where your work, it kind of out of the chute kind of creates a contentious situation to where you're fronting a lot of it and who's contributing and what's going on. And so in a bit of a different avenue, but certainly understanding how to go down that road and also some of the follies of it. So
yeah, that's you just described it to the T. That's yeah, and I know it is tempting because often as a startup, all you have is equity.
Yep.
To offer somebody. You don't have a lot of money to spend, and it's a tricky trade-off. Sometimes that's a tough bargain.
Yep, and it's one where as a startup and small business, you're saying that's what we have to offer, and yet if you're on the other hand, it is always just contention and how or who's contributing what, and hey, I put in 5 hours, well, I put in thousands of dollars, and did you really do the work, and how do you, and it's just one where it's just always easier to if possible to do a different situation. So but it's a great mistake to learn from.
Yep.
Second question I always ask is, now if you're talking to somebody who's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
I realized about 6 weeks into the CEO gig that I took a couple of years ago that I didn't have anybody to talk to. I had people working for me, and I know all the advice that says you never complain down, you only complain up. Well, above me was the board of directors. And the board of directors doesn't want to hear complaints from the CEO. They want the CEO to deal with it, right? And so I hadn't really thought through who am I. I mean, I had my wife, and she has been very helpful and has got good business instincts and whatnot. So what I ended up doing was I started to make acquaintances of other entrepreneurs, other founders who were in the same sort of situation. And, we would talk regularly. And now there are a lot of groups, there are a lot of groups around that do this, although what I found is that a lot of these networking groups, they charge you money. Well, yeah, you can network with once a month, but it's $375. What? So you didn't get the part about startup, did you? With no money. So and as some of these folks, I still talk to once a month. We just chat what's going on. And the interesting thing that I found out of it, one is you've got an opportunity to talk to people who are on a similar journey. They may not be at the same point in the journey, and certainly they're different product and they come up with different skill sets. But it's being in charge of something that's growing. There were interesting lessons that we could learn from each other. One guy that I spent a lot of time with, literally younger than my children, and he just had a way of thinking about customers that was really innovative and was helpful to me. And I think on the other hand, he hadn't really thought through all the mechanics of things where I had been through some of those. So I think it was a give and take kind of conversation. Having a network is important. Having people that you can talk to, having people that you can share your challenges with, who aren't going to judge you, who aren't beholden to you in some way, so that you do get some honest feedback. And it's surprising how differently someone else might look at the same set of circumstances that you do. and give you some completely different insight that you might not have thought of. So creating, if you're starting the journey and you don't have a network of peers, create that network of peers, because you're going to need the moral support if nothing else, and you're going to need somebody to talk to.
No, I think that's definitely a great piece of advice. And, it is hard when, especially if you're a solo, entrepreneur and you're starting your own thing and you're going through a lot of those stresses and ups and downs and that, having someone to talk to, whether it's a mentor, a friend, whoever, a spouse or whoever it is, can make the journey a lot more enjoyable. And yet it's one where sometimes you feel like you have to do it alone. So I think that's a great piece of advice. So, well, now as we wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. Mike Yinger on LinkedIn, pretty easy to find. Also on Facebook. My website is custsoul, CUSTSOL.com. And my email is michael@custsoul.com. Pretty easy to get a hold of. Would welcome the opportunity to talk to anybody. It's just we could just share journeys even. But I'm not hard to get a hold of, as I find every day when I get the 3 or 4 pitches for something that someone wants me to buy from them. That's okay. That's okay. I get that. That's an important part of life, is sharing and growing that way.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, connect, and explore a lot of great expertise and services they may need, and if nothing else, make a new best friend. And so, well, with that, as we wrap up the episode, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been a fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be a guest there. Also, as listeners, if you can make sure to click share, subscribe, and leave us a review, it helps us to make sure that we can share all these journeys with even more entrepreneurs and startups as they're going along their journey. Last but not least, if you ever need help with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Michael, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you, Devin. I appreciate the time.